been going through the Genesis on Joseph. We're on the sixth part. And just want to let you know you're here Wednesday. I've got pretty sick Wednesday. And been sick since. So, been on antibiotics. So, if I cough in the microphone, I apologize. I've taken my cough medicine, I got my cough drops, I got my water. I'll try to turn my head, but I can't guarantee it. But I think what she just sang was good is we can raise our hands and our voices in church, but we need to do it outside of church. And I think the silence has been long enough, too long, outside, so we need to do that. If you wanted a title for today, we're on the sixth part of Joseph. It'd be Seeing God's Hand, Allowing God's Hand, and Working with God's Hand. So often we don't do any of those three. When you're looking at it, you can often see it, but you see it in Seeing God's Hand in Genesis 41. We touched on it just a little bit last week, but I want to look at it. Remember, he was just put in charge, and second in charge of all of Egypt. He was also given a wife, and the wife, if you look at it, her name and the name that Pharaoh gave him was after actually a goddess of Egypt. She was the daughter of a priest of that belief. So you think about it, Joseph didn't ask for her, but he got her. But the influence you're going to have. It's interesting when you stop and think about it, just in the name part of it alone. Was her father able to answer Pharaoh about the dream?
No.
Do you think he would have been one of them that would have been included? But Joseph could because of his God. So you think about it, here you have it. So seeing God's hand, notice he's second in command. But then you have him, he's 7 years of abundance also in 46 down to 49, just as he was prophesied. And you think about it, here and they're taking away 20% of everybody's yield. Pharaoh could do what he wanted, and Pharaoh then is taking 20%. How well do you think that goes over, going to everybody and saying, all right, we haven't taxed you 20%, but we're taxing you 20% of all your yield of your field. That was an incredibly abundant years. And it talks about then that it was so great that Joseph even stopped counting the amount of volume that was being brought in. I think it's a good thing for us too. How many of us are putting aside during abundant years? So here he's putting aside. So here we have Seeing God's Hand. God put him second charge. God's doing exactly what he said he would do in the dream. And then notice in verse 50, he has two sons that are born to him. And notice he names the two sons. Notice it says about before the famine began. So the first 7 years, he has two sons. He's given a wife. He has two children are born, two sons. Notice the first one's Manasseh. Notice why he names him Manasseh in verse 51. God has made me forget all my troubles and all my household. So for 13 years of all the pain he's gone through in Egypt, he recognizes who's in control. That God's in control. And God gave me this water, and God gave me this son. I think it's important how he names it. What would you and I have named it? Even Benjamin, if you look back, Benjamin is the name that Jacob gave. It wasn't the name that his mother gave him. But notice then the second son is born in 52, and he named the second Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So did Joseph see God's hand? Do you think he misses his home? How many times does God put us different places, and are we willing to then say that I can see and I'm thankful for what God's doing? It's an amazing thing. Let me think about some thoughts when I was thinking about this. Bad memories need not defeat us or control us. How many times do bad things destroy us? Second thing, lengthy afflictions need not discourage us, but they can develop us. How many of us learn more through difficulties than through good times? Not that we want the difficulties. This is something I thought was interesting from Swindoll that he gave. With authority comes the need for accountability. Think about it. In one day, where is Joseph? He's in prison, just over the prison part. In the same day, he's cleaned up and he is now in the second chariot, and people are doing what? Bowing down. Now, would that go to the head of the majority of people?
Yes.
Why didn't it to Joseph? Because he recognizes who put him there. He was accountable to God. Second thing, with popularity comes the need for humility. Do you see you see humility in Joseph? The third thing, I think, is with prosperity comes the need for integrity. Does he have integrity? He has all three of them. But I want you to think about this too. How many older brothers does Joseph have?
10.
10? So for the previous, you think about it, before he became second in command. So for 13 years, had he stayed where he was, how much administrative ability or chances do you think he might have got with 10 older brothers? But how much did he get when he was in Potiphar's house and then in the prison? God was preparing. He would not have been ready to be second in command, humanly speaking, had he stayed where he was at. Now, of course, they meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, and Joseph could see that later. But think about that. So think about that in our own lives. Is God developing me even during difficult times? Seeing God's hand. Just kind of humorous, just talking about a name, how you see the importance. Sometimes names, we do things and don't think about it. I was having breakfast a little over a week ago. The waitresses, people at the table were relating to me how the waitress. So I asked her about the name of her dog. And her son had named their dog Grandpa. Now, why in the world you name your dog Grandpa, I don't know. But then she related something kind of humorous in the name. She said, yeah, you should have seen it when we were at Walmart buying dog food. And we said, yeah, that's Grandpa's favorite. Grandpa doesn't like that one, but he really likes that one. I can just imagine some of the looks. It's interesting sometimes we don't think about that poor grandpa they're doing. First of all, are we seeing God's hand in our life? Notice the second thing, are we allowing God's hand to work? In chapter 42, it's interesting. Then you notice they're brothers, and we're going to try to go through 3 chapters, so we'll just go, we know the story quite well. The first part, notice his brothers then come down to visit because the famine was so severe, and they hear about food there. So you notice then he recognizes his brothers in 1-7. He recognizes them. They don't recognize him. Obviously, he'll be dressed differently. He's speaking a different language. He's going to be speaking through an interpreter. And he's also disguising himself. And so obviously, too, when they're going down there, they're not going down there looking for him. How many of you have ever seen somebody you even know, but just in a different setting you don't recognize? So here they are. He recognizes his brothers. But notice the refinement that his brothers are going through. You remember, and I want you to think about this refinement. Did Joseph have anything to do with this refinement? No. Nor did Jacob have anything to do with it. So who was doing the refinement? God was. I think it's important for us to remember that. So notice, first of all, the refinement. Notice immediately he takes them, Joseph does, and he calls them spies. And he starts asking questions, and so they're just answering his questions. And he talks about, you notice down in verse 13, your servants are 12 brothers, and all sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more. And one is no more standing there. Okay? But notice then they're telling him. He's asking questions. He's calling them spies. He's testing them. And notice he says, all right, we're going to see how much you care about each other now. I'm going to keep one of you. The rest of you are, first of all, he puts all 10 of them in prison for 3 days. Do you think that might have put back a little memory to him? Did Joseph deserve to be put in the pit? Were we ever told how long he was in the pit? No? Makes you wonder if it happened to be 3 days. I don't know. Because he has them in there for 3 days. Puts them in there for 3 days. And then he lets him out after in verse 17, and he says, all right, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just keep one of you, and the rest of you have to go back, and I won't sell you any more food, nor or anything else, unless you bring him back. But I'm going to keep the one. And notice what happens is, the reason I say refining, notice in verse 21. Then they said to one another, truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul, and he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us. And Reuben answered them and said, did not I tell you, do not sin against the boy? You wouldn't listen. Now the reckoning of his blood has come. They were speaking, and obviously could Joseph understand it? Notice then, God was doing his work. Nothing that Jacob did, because Jacob doesn't know. Nothing that Joseph did, because Joseph wasn't there. How many times do you and I need to recognize and allow God to do his job? We simply need to pray, but let him do his job. Now granted, it has taken how many years? He was in confinement how many? 13. We had how many years of good?
7.
That makes how many?
20.
20. And then the famine's going to take place. It's going to take a while for it to take effect, and before they come down. So you're over 20 years of this before this takes place. 20 plus years. But God is working in their heart. God's working on their conscience. And now all of a sudden something comes up and it's pricking their conscience. Notice then what happens is he then takes Simon. Now why did he take Simon? Who's the oldest?
Reuben.
So when Reuben went and was out, remember he was going to come back and rescue him. Who would then be in charge? Simon? Did Simon do anything? Is that why he has Simon? Could be. Okay, so he keeps Simon, and notice then he gives strict orders to put the grain back in their sacks, or in the money back in their sacks. So again, he's working. Notice why did he do that? Notice in verse 28, the money returned, and he said to his brothers, "It was even in my sack." And their hearts sank, and they turned trembling to one another and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" You know, how many times do you and I blame God for stuff that's, you think about it? Was God working? God's working in all the circumstances. The money being given back, all this is being worked. Now, how many times do we need to let God work and stay out of his way? God's working on their hearts. How many times do we get in the way and mess stuff up? So think about it. The 10 recognize God's hand, and we need to do what? Allow him to work. How many of us have kind of tried to step in and we kind of mess stuff up? Notice on their return home then, they have it in verse 29 to 38, and they retell the story to their dad in 29 to 34. And notice the refining that needs to take place with Jacob. Notice in 35 and in 36, came about when they emptied their sacks, that behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack, and when they and their father saw their bundle of money, they were dismayed. And their father Jacob said to them, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, Simon is no more, and you would take Benjamin. All these things are against me." Isn't that kind of what they said before? Woe is me. Was it woe is me, or is God at work?
How does that work?
God's at work. How many times do we misread circumstances? Any of you ever misread circumstances? We think about it. If Norman hadn't gone, they happened to just take that one more test, what might have happened to Norman? He would have croaked. That's right. I think it's important. There's a lot of times we don't recognize what can happen. So here he has. Notice, but Jacob, there has to be some refining in Jacob as well. He's had some, but he needs more. Same with all of us. Notice also the returning of the money. I think it's interesting. In 18, you find it, and so on. But notice also the refining of Reuben in 37 and 38. Reuben spoke to his father, "You may put my 2 sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my care, and I'll return him to you." But Jacob said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If harm shall befall him on the journey, you are taking, then you will bring gray hair down to Sheol in my sorrow. Now, again, notice the growth of Reuben. That is growth of Reuben. Before, remember, he wouldn't stand up. Remember, he was going to sneak back and let Joseph out. Here he stands right up and says, I'll take charge. Now what happens is he says it when food is plentiful. We just got back from the trip. Judah is going to stand up later when the food's running out, when they're getting desperate. But there is some growth in Reuben's part. Hey, he does stand up right away and do it. And again, I think we have to allow certain ones or certain family members are more leaders than others. Obviously, Judah is the most natural leader that they have. But once you think about that, how often do we misread situations? Have you ever missed? It's easy. How many of us see bad circumstances, not the good? Never forget when I was working and I was in Alabama, I decided to stay in Alabama for a summer. And I had a job lined up, supposed to tear off roofs. We tore off the first roof, and the guy decided to not do it anymore. Well, you've signed to rent this house. How are you going to do it? You go work for UPS and you just start working for them and they go on national strike. God, you told me to come here. What in the world's going on? You told me to stay. What's going on? So most of my life, all I've done is yard work, so I started doing yard work. I worked for Mrs. Hamner and Mrs. Ketchum. And because of those ladies, we live today where we live. It's where Ruthie is named after, and half of my possessions are because of it. But if I didn't have the strike and I didn't have everything else, we wouldn't have been there. So again, it's interesting. You have to be thankful for what you don't know what you're going through, but God does. And we have to stay true to the course. Notice then in 43, I think it's interesting working with God's plan. And I want you to think about it. Notice the return with Benjamin is from verse 1 through verse 15. They come back and the famine's so great. And Judah's saying, notice, I think it's interesting, send him in charge of me and I'll bring him back. Now, Reuben did it earlier. We don't know how long it took for that food to run out. Obviously, it would have taken a while. And you see the food getting lower. We know how bad it is. Notice what Judah, in verse 38, Judah says to his father, send the lad with me, and we will rise and go. We may live and not die, we as well as you and our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame before you forever. For if we had not delayed, surely by now we could have returned twice. Notice the offer's been made. Reuben did it initially. Judah's making it now. And notice, hey, quit delaying. We're running out of food and we're all going to die. Notice again, who's the one that recommended the sale of Joseph to begin with? Judah did. Notice now he's making a change. You see it, God's worked in his life too over the last number. He married a foreign woman, remember, that he wasn't supposed to. Obviously with Tamar, he's done other things. Notice in 11, and obviously it's gotten so bad, the father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then be. Take some of the best produce of the land. Notice they're bringing some products that they have here that they would not get in Egypt. And they're bringing it back, and also bring double your money. Not only what we paid for, that we got back to us, but also for the new amount. Bring it back to them. Take your brother and go. And notice in 14, may God Almighty grant you compassion in the sight of the man, that he may release you and your brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. How well is Jacob remembering the dreams? Did God not give him the dreams with Joseph that many years before? How well are they remembering God's promises? How well do we remember God's promises when things are bad? Were they not still there? Notice then they take the stuff and they go to Egypt. You ever wonder how that just happened to come before Joseph each time? Do you think that where Joseph was, you think every person of every foreign country all came to Joseph? Or how many people do you think were coming? if you have a famine that says, in the text, it says that's over the whole world, and a whole world is coming to Egypt, how many people do you think are coming? Now, they're all under Joseph initially, but they're going to have all the cities, major cities, you remember, had places where food was at. So how many places are they coming? How is it that Joseph is always there where his brothers are coming? Obviously, he planted himself there where they would come, but obviously God is working. So notice then Joseph sees them, and notice in verse 16, Joseph saw him and said, I want you to bring them to my house and they're going to dine with me. Oh boy. Notice conscience working again. And notice they do this. Notice in verse 18, now the men, talking about his brothers, were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house and said, it is because of the money that was returned in our sacks the first time that we being brought in, that he may seek occasion against us and fall upon us and take us as slaves with our donkeys. Are they misreading the circumstances? Have you ever misread circumstances? Would that be natural? Sure would be. And notice then they come near to Joseph's steward. And I want you to think about Joseph's steward. What nationality do you think he would be?
Probably Egyptian.
Egyptian, okay. What religious beliefs do you think he would have had initially? Okay, so he'd be pagan with the different gods. So how long has he been under Joseph, more than likely then? Okay, this would be 7 years plus this is the second trip, so maybe 9, 10 years. Because it's important when you see what he says. So he's been under Joseph for the last 10 years or so. And notice then they come down and they open the sacks and they're relating to him what's taking place. They're bringing this down to him. And notice what he says in 23. Now this is the steward. And he's speaking to him. Be at ease. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given your treasures in your sack. I had your money. Who does he give credit to?
God.
The true God. Now he doesn't say your brother's God, because that would have given it away. Notice he says not just your father's God, but your father's God and your God, and I know him as well. Only way he knows him is because of who? Joseph. It's kind of sad the steward had to say it was God. Why didn't they see that it was God? But the steward was the spokesman that he should have been and was doing exactly what Joseph is telling him to do. It's a great testament for the steward. Also a great testament of what Joseph is doing in his family. You could easily see the influences that could go the other way. So they turn the money, and you see what's taking place. But notice again, am I a positive influence on those around me? Joseph was. And that's the only reason why the steward would know. Notice then the resentment or not. Okay, so now he's going to test him again. So they're going to eat with him. And notice then he puts them on and he brings the food out and Simeon is brought to them. Now remember, I think it's interesting in verse 34, he sets them in their birthright. And again, how are they going to know that? How are they going to know, all right, he sets us according to our age. Now obviously Benjamin would be pretty easy to see, he's the youngest. But how are you going to know the other's age? And then notice what he does in 34, he gives Benjamin how much? 5 times as much as they get. Now when that happened, when Joseph was shown partiality by his dad, what did they do?
Jealous.
They were jealous. He's testing them, but notice in 34, there was no jealousy shown. Was there growth on their part? Be thankful for what you have and don't be jealous. They had all 10 of them are showing growth in their life. But who did that in their life? God did. I think it's important for us to recognize that God works in people's lives, but it takes time. We need to work with His plan, and we need to allow Him to work. Notice the next thing you have. They're not resentful, so notice are they refined or not? In chapter 44, he's now going to test them again. And notice, he then sends them back. They go back, and he says, I want you to notice he sets this up on purpose It's not that it's true, but notice when he sends him out in verse 4, he puts the cup in, and notice in Benjamin's sack, and notice when he has it, notice in verse 5, is this not the one from which my Lord drinks, which he indeed uses for divination? Well, Joseph didn't use it that way, but he's making it look like this is a very special cup, and without it, he can't find out what God's doing or wanting to do. Boy, this is an important cup, and look, you stole it. Now, the reason he's setting this up is that if they want to get rid of Benjamin like Joseph, what are they going to do? Remember, they all said, whosever sack it's in, what? Haiti. Hey, we got rid of the first one he loved the most. And hey, it isn't our fault. He's the one with the cup. Take him. He's guilty, not us. We didn't take it. We didn't know it was in there. Notice 20, 30 years later, there's changes. So you think about it. So here they all come back. And they notice they lowered. And notice it's interesting in 13 when they find out it's in Benjamin's. And notice again they start from the oldest to the youngest. Can you imagine after they get to the 10th one? This is a waste of time. We knew we didn't have it. And then all of a sudden, there it is. Notice they tear their clothes in 13. They each get on their donkey and they all return. And they all fall on their face before Joseph. And then notice what Judah does in 16. He starts to relay the message that he has about how important Benjamin is to their father. And it's a beautiful, beautiful testament that takes place. Notice what he has when he's going through it. And he approaches him in 18, and he asks for an audience with Joseph. And he talks about having, in verse 20, how this is a child of his old age, and if his brother, obviously he says is dead, because he thinks Joseph is, obviously he's not. He alone is left of his mother, and his father loves him. Notice he's saying what? Dad loves who the most? Benjamin. But I love my dad, and this is going to destroy him. Before, did they care anything about it? No. A total change is taking place in their lives because God was working in their life. Apart from Jacob and apart from Joseph. How many of us are trying to manipulate kids and grandkids and everything else when we need to say, God, I got to let you work, and I need to pray for you to work, and I want to work in your plan. So it's interesting when he goes on, and notice then he goes on and he says, talking about Joseph now, he had 2 sons. One went out from me, and I said, surely he is torn in pieces. I have not seen him since. Well, that's true. He did say, I told Dad he was torn in pieces. He wasn't. Obviously, can you imagine here's Joseph hearing exactly what's taking place, not knowing who he's talking to. And if you take this one also from me and harm befalls him, you will bring my gray hair down to Sheol in sorrow. Now, in verse 30, now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with me, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, you come about, and he sees the lad is not with us, he will die. Thus your servant will bring gray hair of your servant of our father down to Sheol in sorrow. For your servant has become surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him to you, then you may let me bear the blame before my father forever. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord, and let the lad go with his brothers. For I shall go up to my father, and if my lad is not with me, lest I see the evil that will overtake my dad. Did he see evil overtake his dad when Joseph wasn't there? So think about it. He's saying what? I'll take his place. Send the rest back. Perfect example of what Jesus is going to do, a descendant of Judah later is going to do. But notice a total change. Before, Judah said what? Hey, I just don't let him die. I want Joseph die. Let's at least get some money for him. And then they just let him go, and they sat down and ate a meal and didn't think anything about it. Notice the total change that you have in Judah's life. Again, the changes, and as well as in all their brothers' lives. Because of what? God was working in their life. But it takes time, and they allowed it to. So think about just some applications when you think about it. Are my difficulties defeating me or defining me? You know, you think about how many of us are like Jacob? Oh, woe is me, it's terrible. That's our normal tendency. Rather than say, hey, you're allowing it, you're making me better. And that's the reason why Joseph at 30 was able to be second in command, is because for 13 years, all the development. Had he stayed at home, he would not have been developed. Do I see God at work in my life and in my circumstances? Why or why not? Like Joseph, do I have a positive influence on those around me? Did he have an influence on the head steward? Like Judah, have I changed from only me to caring more for others than myself? You think about it, with Judah, he was ready to say, the rest of my life I'm going to be what? And what did he do to his brother before? He sold him as a slave for what? The rest of his life. In his eyes. A tremendous change took place because of what God did. So how many of us are seeing God's hand, allowing God's hand, and then working with God's hand? Working with God's hand. Working with God's hand. Working with God's hand.